Did you know the US government claims to have legal grounds to deport Mahmoud Khalil? They say he lied on his residency application and even argue that he poses a national security threat. But beyond the accusation, this case reveals how a misinterpretation of the law could impact any immigrant, even if they haven't committed a crime. We will break it all down, and in the end, you decide. Are there enough grounds to deport Mahmoud Khalil? Let's get started. If this is your first time here and you're unfamiliar with Khalil's case, here's a quick background. Mahmoud Khalil, a US permanent resident and a well-known pro-Palestinian activist, is facing deportation due to his activism at Columbia University. However, this case has gained widespread attention because of the irregularities in his arrest, which unfortunately are quite common, and the reasons the Trump administration is using to justify his removal. Let's take a closer look. First, government's arguments. Khalil applied for permanent residency after marrying a US citizen, but the Department of Justice claims he committed immigration fraud by failing to disclose his past employment with the United Nations Relief and Work Agency for Palestinian Refugees and the British Embassy in Beirut. He is accused of concealing his affiliation with Columbia University Apartheid Divest, a group that supports pro-Palestinian protests and other things. The government also argues that Khalil is a national security threat due to ties to Hamas, a terrorist organization. So far, government hasn't presented any evidence that Khalil has violated any US laws. Working for UNRWA does not automatically mean Khalil supports terrorist organizations, but it is suggestive. The question that the government actions raises is Khalil being targeted just for political activism. Let me be clear. I do not support or condone what Khalil says or believes. However, he has a right to express his opinions legally in the United States. I will defend his right to do so because tomorrow that could be you or me who is targeted just for expressing our views. Khalil's lawyers say these accusations are baseless and his activism is protected under the First Amendment. He might be right. We don't know enough yet, or I don't know enough yet to decide. But here's where it gets complicated. Department of Justice attempted to use a section of the 1952 Immigration and Naturalization Act that allows deportation if there are, quote, reasonable grounds, end quote, to believe someone poses a risk to U.S. foreign policy. However, that same law states a person can't be deported solely for their beliefs or statements. And Khalil has yet to be formally charged with aiding Hamas, a terrorist organization, or committing any crimes. So can the government violate his rights just because his views are controversial? Let's talk about the arrest. Khalil's arrest was highly irregular. He was taken into custody by plainclothes officers with no clear identification, and he never showed a warrant. Unfortunately, that happens all the time, particularly when immigrants don't know their rights and insist on them. He was then denied access to his attorney. That's highly irregular. And he was transferred to detention center in Louisiana, far from his home in New York. That happens way too often as well, and I really hope the detention puts a stop to that. These actions violate his rights to due process, which is protected by the US Constitution. That same weekend, ICE attempted to detain another international student from Colombia, but was unable to enter her apartment. Probably knew her rights. They also arrested Lika Cordia, another Palestinian student. This pattern of arrests suggests the Trump administration is aggressively targeting Palestinian activists, something former president said he would do, but maybe shouldn't be a surprise now that he's doing it. If you want more details about Khalil's arrest and the legal violations involved, check out our previous video that we've linked in the description below. Let's talk about the immigration aspects now. What is immigration fraud and misrepresentation? There's been a lot of talk about immigration fraud and misrepresentation in Khalil's case, but what do these terms actually mean? Immigration fraud occurs when someone provides false or misleading information on their immigration applications to obtain an immigration benefit. One type of fraud is misrepresentation, either intentional or accidental. If the omitted or falsified information is considered material, meaning it would have influenced the government's decision, then it can result in a denial of residency or even deportation. What does it mean for an omission to be material? Let's look at some examples. Matter of Tijam, 1998 case, Ms. Tijam, an immigrant, filed for a green card based on marriage to a U.S. citizen. However, she failed to disclose her prior marriage. This was material because without a death certificate or divorce decree from her first marriage, it means the current marriage is invalid. The Board of Immigration Appeals upheld the denial of her green card application, meaning she lost it and she was deported. In 2011, in the case of Singh v. Napolitano, this person omitted their affiliation with the political groups that were linked to human rights abuses. That omission was material because the government would have denied the application had they known of his membership in these groups. His residency was revoked and the appellate courts agreed with that decision. Now, in Khalil's case, was his omission truly material? Failing to disclose his employment at UNRWA and the British Embassy is debatable. Employment at the British Embassy, not likely to be an issue. However, working for UNRWA, which has connections to radical groups, well, that could be material depending on the facts that we don't presently know. What does it mean to have terrorist ties? Under US law, supporting a terrorist organization can include financing that group, meaning giving them money, providing goods or resources, actively participating in illegal activities, and being an official member of the group. To understand how these accusations work, let's look at a couple of cases where ties to terrorist organizations did lead to deportation. Members of Tren de Agua. In March of this year, the US used the Alien Enemies Act to deport 200 people accused of belonging to this Venezuelan gang, which has been designated a terrorist organization. In October of 2024, the government deported Tajik immigrants with suspected ties to ISIS. Tajik, typically from the area in Afghanistan. These immigrants illegally crossed the US border and were allegedly planning an attack against the US. So membership in a group that's tied, material support, and terrorist activities, who's the trifecta. But does expressing political opinions critical of the US government or supporting Palestinian groups count as supporting terrorism? No, not without information that we presently don't have. Freedom of speech is protected by the First Amendment. It would be difficult to deport Khalil under national security grounds without evidence that so far hasn't been shared with the public just because of his stated political opinion. There must be more. Can Khalil avoid deportation? If the government accusing him of misrepresentation, even if his employment are found to be material, that would disqualify Khalil from getting a green card. However, he could file a waiver to forgive his misrepresentation. Khalil would have to prove that his pregnant wife, a US citizen, would suffer extreme hardship if he's deported. That isn't hard to do if you know what you're doing. However, if the government proves that Khalil is a member of a terrorist organization, engaged in terrorist activities, endorsed terrorist activities, or raised funds or provided material support to a terrorist organization like Hamas, then he will be deported. There is no waiver available for such conduct. Khalil's case isn't just about one individual. It sets a dangerous precedent for the immigrant community. The government's actions at the moment are suspect. If they could do this to a lawful permanent resident, what is to stop them from doing it to an undocumented immigrant or even a US citizen? So, Immigration Nation, is Khalil being unfairly punished for his political beliefs, or is the government protecting the country from terrorists? Let me know in the comments. See you in the next video, and remember, whether we like it or not, we're in this together.
Hey, did you like the video? I invite you to watch another video where I share more tips on how to protect your reputation as an immigrant. Until next time.